Let's hear today's message.
Well, good morning. Welcome to everybody who's joining us on site and those who are joining us online again this week. Well, the last few weeks we have been working our way through the book of Malachi. I've come to our third week in this series now. And what we've been learning is that through the prophet Malachi, God is confronting the nation of Israel after they've returned from exile in Babylon. And they had some time to come back and repair the walls and repair the temple. And it looked like things were starting to click for them again finally. But they were failing. Malachi's kind of calling them out for failing to live up to their part of their covenant relationship with God. And so as we've seen throughout the scriptures, throughout the Old Testament to the New Testament, God is nothing but faithful in every season of life for us and for this particular nation that Malachi is addressing. But they don't quite see it that way, do they? They look around at what's happening in their lives. They go, things aren't good. Things are kind of hard. And that leads them, as we've seen the last couple weeks, that leads them to start to doubt God's love for them. It leads them to start to question, is God really good? And the result of these things, as we saw last week, is it started to kind of infect their hearts. And it led to them bringing subpar worship, which was an expression of their relationship that they were to have with God. Now today we're going to continue walking through to the next section. And when that's happening today is that God identifies three areas where their lack of faithfulness to Him is starting to impact not only their relationship with Him, but it's starting to impact their relationship with others as well. Because our relationship with others is not disconnected from our relationship for God. There's a connection that exists there. And basically what God's going to do is He's going to say that these relationships you're in, these covenants that you're in, and that word covenant, we can understand that as being these sacred, binding, non-conditional promises that we make to each other. God's saying that these relationships, these covenant relationships that you're in, need to be honored, need to be respected. You need to be faithful to these covenant relationships in which you're in. Now, all of us have some level of familiarity with covenant relationships. So I'll give you a quick example from my own life. One very important covenant relationship that I entered into happened on August 12th, 1995, when I married Nadine. And on that day, I stood on the platform of the church, and I looked down the aisle, and I watched the doors open, and there was my beautiful bride. And the first thing I thought, I had a little tear that was starting to come to my eye, and the first thing I thought was, she showed up. She actually wants to marry me. It's more reflection of me than on her. She actually wants to marry me. And then on that day, before our friends, before our families, and before God, we entered into solemn promises with each other. I promised that I'd always love Nadine, that I would always care for her, that I would laugh with her, protect her, I would be her encourager. And then I'm not sure she heard me say all of those things because, quite honestly, I was crying through the whole thing. I was just a weeping, sobbing mess. I'm so glad it wasn't on video at that particular point. But you see, I'm not as big and scary as some people think I am. I'm actually kind of a softie. And that's why Nadine, back to me, promised that she'd always love me, encourage me, protect me, support me, and commit her life to me. And as we did that, we then took the pages of our stories and we glued them together. We sealed them. We glued them together as two me's became a we. In that day, through that covenant relationship. That's what took place. And here we are, almost 30 years later, and she is still madly in love with me. Well, sometimes she's just mad at me, but I think she still loves me. Perhaps you can relate to some of this. Perhaps there's other covenants that you've entered into in your life as well. Maybe there's marriages you've entered into, churches you've attended and become members of. Or maybe you can look back to when you accepted God's gift of forgiveness for you and you entered into a covenant relationship with God. We all have these covenant relationships we entered into. And Malachi is looking at the nation of that time and he is saying, you have broken these. You have broken these three. You have broken them, and it's led to division, and it's led to hurt. And not just between you and God, but it leads to division. And we know this to be true. When broken covenants happen, it leads to hurt between us and others as well. Not just between us and God. And so as we continue to walk through this passage today, and it's going to be in Malachi chapter 2, verse 10. You can find that on page 778 of your Pew Bibles, or of course, just use the Pew portal to take you right to the sermon notes. As we walk through this passage today, I hope that we can learn from their mistakes, so that we can remain faithful to our covenants, knowing that it brings honor to God, but it also brings blessings to us by doing so. So I just want to start with a prayer here. Heavenly Father, guide us through this passage, I pray. As we talk about these things, I know that there are many in this congregation who are experiencing joy and fulfillment in their covenant relationships. But Lord, I also know that there are those who have hard memories of broken covenants in their lives. And there are those who are here with us today on site and online who need conviction because they're on the verge of breaking covenants. Lord, as we talk about hard things today, I pray that you will guide us and be with us and equip us to have soft hearts to hear your word and your truth. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So, first one I want to jump into. The first covenant that God covers in this passage. It has to do with being faithful to our covenants with the community in which we exist in with one another. And here's what we read in verse 10 of chapter 2, where God says this to the prophet Malachi. Do we not have one Father, and did not the one God create us? So why do we profane the covenant of our ancestors by being unfaithful to one another? Very simple question. Why do we profane these past covenants by being unfaithful to each other? Now, there's opening verses here. It kind of speaks to the nature of God and the nature of God as a God of covenants. And what he's doing is he's referencing back to something that this nation would be very, very familiar with, is that God is a God of covenants. There are multiple covenants that existed in their history with their forefathers. For example, you can go back, and this will be in the sermon notes. You'll see that there's a reference to the Abrahamic covenant, where God first calls them out to be his people, to be a blessing to all nations. And then we can fast forward to where there's the Mosaic covenant, where God says, you are my people, but now I'm calling you to be a holy, set apart people as I give you my law on how to live amongst other peoples. And then we can fast forward to the Davidic covenant, where God says to David, one of your ancestors will always sit upon my throne, including the Messiah, who one day will come from the line of David. There's all these covenants that exist in the history of this people. And God is known as the one who created and as the one who established these covenants, and therefore, he is the father of all who are included in these covenants. But did you know it's not just a reference to the Old Testament people, to the Jewish nation of this time? Because if we fast forward even a bit more to Romans chapter 11, Paul talks about how all people who have entered into a relationship, into a covenant relationship with Jesus Christ, have been grafted into these covenant promises that existed. You see, if you have a relationship with Jesus Christ, then you can count yourself amongst the people who are granted access to all of these blessings of God. And you too can call God your Father, who is the creator of all these promises. And if we are one under God the Creator and God the Father, if we are one all under him, it constitutes this idea of a family. And in order for all people who are part of those covenant relationships to be in a healthy family, doesn't it stand to reason that we also not only need to be faithful to God, but we also need to be faithful to our brothers and sisters? Does that make sense? The interconnectedness of God, Father, and all under him, to have a healthy, functioning family, we have to be faithful to our brothers and sisters as well. Now, the way that we would understand this in our current day and current context is that I'm talking about the unity within the church. And did you know that this is such an important, critical topic in the New Testament in particular, that Jesus talked about this and Paul wrote about it 60 times. 60 times this was a topic of discussion that came up under the writings of the what we refer to as the one another's. 60 times Jesus spoke and Paul wrote about how we interact and live in covenant relationship with one another. Now, obviously, I haven't got time to go through all of those verses. If you are following along in the sermon notes, I've included a link to a web page that will list all of them for you. And what you'll see is that these 60 verses can be broken down into three categories, basically. They break down to the category of love, humility, and unity. And then there's a couple about kissing, but we're not going to talk about those ones today. So, love, humility, and unity. Now, I can't go through them all, but very quickly, just to summarize them, this idea of love, this command to love one another as God loves us. Now, this whole idea of loving one another, that itself is a command like 11 times that we come across. But then we also find verses that talk about how love fulfills the law of God. If we love each other, we're fulfilling the laws of God. If we love each other, we can serve each other in love. Looking at humility, this idea of an attitude of humbleness and respect for others, where we honor others above ourselves, where we serve one another as though we're serving Christ who is above us as well, where we can be humble by not being selfish, but by valuing others, by putting others ahead of ourselves, their needs ahead of our own. And then the third idea of unity, that as we put this all together, the love and the humility, as we bring that together, and then we work hard to get along with each other for the sake of Christ, where we accept each other as Christ accepted us, where we practice kindness and we practice forgiveness, where we bear with one another and we don't hold any grievances, but we do the hard work to practice courageous community to work towards resolving grievances. See, God was really concerned about our faithfulness to this covenant. And I think there's two reasons that he's so concerned about this. And one of them is this, is that whether we're talking about the Old Testament people and the New Testament people, whichever season we're going to talk about here, his people often represent him in the world. There are some people in your life where you work and live and where you play. There are some people in your life who the only way that they will come to know about God is through you. And if they know that you're a Christian, and when they sit back and watch your life, and they see things like anger and selfishness and division, the exact opposite of those things up there, what does that tell them about God? What are they to understand about the one that you claim to be your father, that you're created in the image of? Does that sound anger, selfishness, division? Does that sound like something you need more of in your life? Does that sound like something that the world has plenty of? That maybe if we could offer something different, would all of a sudden grab some attention of people who will become curious about God? You see, the way that we interact with each other is important, first of all, because I think it shows the world an aspect of who God is or who he is to be in us. But secondly, it's so important because the communities that we maintain with one another, they will either be life-giving or they will be life-taking from our own lives. Now, Mike personally, and maybe some others of you, have been part of churches in the past that were life-taking, where they were defined by conflict and power struggles and worship wars that would take place. And the end result is that people got hurt. Some people even left the church. And I know many people, many people from one church I can think of in the past that went through something like that, where they didn't just leave that church, they left like the church. They want nothing to do with the body of Christ at all because of the injury that they suffered at the hands of people in that community. But folks, at West Meadows, we strive to be a life-giving community. We are committed. I am personally committed to striving to help us be a life-giving community because we want you to experience and to find healthy community here amongst us, where you find authentic, genuine people who are generous with their love and with their time and with their lives, who are committed to one another and committed to Jesus Christ. Now, does that mean that we're perfect and that we never make mistakes? Not at all. But it does mean that we want to learn from them and do better. Am I suggesting that West Meadows is therefore the right church for all people? No. No, there's a lot of wonderful churches around, but whenever you walk through the doors or come to encounter our community here, we want you to feel loved. We want you to feel welcomed. Because we desire to be a life-giving community and a life-giving witness of Jesus Christ to the world. Amen? That's what we want to do. And when we do so, we honor God and we honor the covenant relationship that we have with him and with one another. Now, that's not what was happening in the community that Malachi was addressing. Those people were more defined by the other things, by the anger and the division and the stress. And Malachi is addressing a group of people who are life-taking from their situation. And let me ask you this question. When things in people's lives aren't going well, when things are pretty stressed and amped up in your life, if we could be honest, who often bears the brunt of that stress and that issue? Isn't it true that it's often those who are closest to us, in particular our families, and especially our marriages? And those are the covenants that Malachi now turns his attention to. And we read this as we keep reading in verse 11. So I turn to the right page. There we go. Verse 11. Judah has been unfaithful. A detestable thing has been committed in Israel and in Jerusalem. Judah has desecrated the sanctuary of the Lord that the Lord loves by marrying women who worship a foreign god. As for the man who does this, whoever he may be, may the Lord remove him from the tents of Jacob, even though he brings an offering to the Lord Almighty. Another thing you do, you flood the Lord's altar with tears. You weep and you wail because he no longer looks with favor on your offerings or accepts them with pleasure from your hands. Now, in the past, just a little bit of a sidebar. In the past, this passage has been misused. Less so today, but still sometimes today. This passage is misused to condemn interracial marriage. So I just want to state and make sure it's clear. That's not what is being talked about here. And I can tell you that there is actually nothing in Scripture, there's no command against interracial marriage. It's nothing to do with race. What that has to do with is other nations, other people, and their practices of worship. And to fully understand this, we have to go back to Deuteronomy chapter 7. And here's the context of what Malachi is talking about in here. Is to go back to Deuteronomy chapter 7, where God gives a warning to his people who are about to enter into the promised land. And the warning is this: when you enter the land, you're going to find people of pagan nations who are worshiping other gods. And not only was God concerned that they were worshiping other gods, but it was the way in which they worshiped. You see, these other pagan nations were involved in idolatry. They would set up these graven images, and they would kneel down and bow down and worship them in their homes and their cities and throughout the lands. And God had expressly forbidden that. At the same time, the forms of worship they'd engaged in were perverse. They would practice sexual perversion in the temples by having like temple prostitutes that would be part of their worship experience. Even at some places, that sometimes they would practice child sacrifice by giving their children as sacrifices to their gods. And so God says, when you enter the promised land, do not make a treaty with them. And certainly do not intermarry with them. Because if you enter into a relationship with them, they will entice you away from me. And if they entice you away from me, it's going to break this covenant that we have. And if they entice you away and you worship other gods in the way that they're doing it, my anger will burn against you if you do this. You are my holy people. You are a people chosen from all people to be a holy, set-apart, treasured possession of mine, God says. You see, God's concern is that if his people allow themselves to be enticed by mainly the Canaanites of this land, then whether they allow themselves to be enticed and they cut themselves off from the covenants of God by choosing to wander, or if they practice worshiping other gods in this faction and God rejects them, the result is the same. They lose their place. They break the covenant. They lose their place in the covenant blessings, and there's a risk to the next generation. There's a risk to the next generation too. You see, now in the New Testament, we find an equivalent principle and an equivalent warning in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, where Paul says this. He says, do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what do the righteousness and the wickedness have to do with each other? What do they have in common? Now, what's this idea of yoke meaning? First of all, it has nothing to do with eggs. There's no yoking in there. It has nothing to do with my hilarious dad yokes. It's got nothing to do with that. Right? This yoke is about a wooden bar. And you will put this bar across the shoulders of two oxen. And then whatever load or whatever work they had to do, they could pull together. They could pull together. They could achieve that together. But here's the warning. If you have one ox that's stronger than the other, or if you have one that's taller than the other, when they pull, they won't pull with the same effort, and they won't pull in the same direction. And so if you're unequally yoked, one is going to pull you off course to where you need to be going to accomplish the work that you need to have accomplished. Now, the Bible is not applying this to every single relationship in our lives. It's, I don't think that we necessarily need to strictly apply this to all of our friends and coworkers and teammates and where we go to school, simply because if we are only yoked with believers, it's really hard for us to be salt and light into the lives of those who need to experience the love of Jesus Christ. Primarily what's being discussed here is do not enter into a covenant relationship. Do not pledge yourself. Do not bind yourself into agreement with somebody who is not going to pull in the same direction as you. And this can include things like business deals. It can include financial ventures. These things where we pledge and bind ourselves to another person. And within the context of Malachi 2, it absolutely applies to not yoking yourself to an unbeliever in marriage. Now, over the years, I have married a lot of people. And I have received inquiries from even more people. But one of the questions I look at very early in the time I meet with them, are they equally yoked? Do they hold the same faith? Not the same spiritual formation, not the same, maybe the same maturity in faith, but do they hold the same faith? And if they don't, for me as a pastor, to marry them, it's a deal breaker. It's a deal breaker. Because when I stand in front of their friends and their family and our God, and I speak their marriage into existence, I have to believe in it. And I have to believe that it has a chance of being healthy and sustainable. Now, to many, I come across where there's a believer who's marrying a non-believer. And they hope that one day they'll win the non-believer over. And often, both of these people are really, really nice people, very, very kind, madly in love with each other, really good intentions on their future together and how that's going to work. And that, usually the non-believer is like, yeah, no, I'm interested. I'm curious, intrigued by this. But here's the thing, and I'm speaking to the singles right now. To those who are on site and online with us who are single right now, I'm speaking to you specifically. I'm speaking to those who still have a choice to make in this matter. Know that here's the issue, is that you and your partner in this situation hold completely different worldviews and systems of belief, okay? And those are powerful. Is that because your worldview and your belief is powerful enough that it will be what you form your life around. And if you have one worldview and one set of belief systems, the other person has another worldview, set of belief systems, even if they're similar, but they're different, especially when it comes to understanding who God is and the importance of a relationship with Him through Jesus Christ. If you have two completely different systems of belief for that, you will form your life around what those look like. But know this, that those worldviews exude a gravitational pull upon each other. And you'll end up with one of two scenarios. Either one, you'll both have these lives that exist around these two world value systems, two belief systems, and either you will never have a gravitational pull, you'll never pull them together, and you'll continue to live lives separately. You'll never experience that oneness. You will never have two lives that come together. You'll never be two me's that become a we, because you're going to have two different trajectories and two different things that you have opposite of each other. But you know what happens most often? Most often, one of these has a stronger gravitational pull than the others. And in my 17 years of being a pastor and going through this with people, 9 times out of 10, the unbeliever's pull is stronger. And they start to pull the believer over. And it may not happen in a week or a month or a year, but over the period of time, all of a sudden, that person who was so committed to Christ has set that aside. And they start to come towards, hold more of a worldview that aligns with the world. Now, does that mean that unbelievers never come to faith? No. When I started dating Nadine, she was not a Christian. She was what she refers to as a pre-Christian. But she accepted Christ before we got married. So here's the thing. And I know this isn't easy, but this is serious. If you are dating or engaged to a person that does not love and fear the Lord, you are in dangerous territory. And you have some hard decisions to make. Because you're playing a risky game with your faith, with your future and with your family. And if you don't believe me, I would be more than happy to line up men and women who will share their stories with you through pain and tears on how they traded one season of loneliness for a lifetime of loneliness. It's a serious thing to consider as we look at binding ourselves into a covenant, lifelong relationship with somebody, especially in the context of marriage. And if you don't believe me, believe the Word of God. And believe us that your faith, that your future, and that your family is worth the wait. Be faithful to God in your covenant with Him, and I promise you that He will be faithful to you. I promise you He will. This is real life stuff that we run into, that the Scriptures speak to. You know, years ago, I was mentoring a young adult, this guy, and he met a lovely young lady. He was head over heels for her, like nauseatingly infatuated with her. It was, you know what I'm talking, right? You met that person who every time they talk about this new love of their life, you're like, oh my gosh, it's like sickeningly sweet. And you just like stop, right? Anyways, she could do no wrong. But I'm discipling him, I'm mentoring him, I'm trying to speak truth, and so I'm looking at this through a different lens than he is, right? He's just got like head over heels for this lady, and I'm looking through different lenses. And I come to find out that she's not a believer, and so I caution him. Now, he has to make his own choices, his own life, but I caution him. You know, be careful that she doesn't pull you away from your faith, because one of you is going to have a stronger pull upon the other. And then I start to learn more that she's really controlling and be a little more concerned. And then I find out that she's taking advantage of him. She's kind of using him in a lot of different ways. And then I see evidence that his faith is starting to slip. And I have all these concerns as we're walking together, and then I find out that she's actively involved in the occult. So, I don't often tell people what to do. I suggest, hint, point them in a direction. I don't often tell them what to do, but for me, that was it. I'm like, stop, man. And I was just blunt, like, you need to end this. This is right before Christmas, a few weeks before Christmas. And he's like, you know what, you're right. I can see things that are heading in the wrong direction. And now with this new revelation, that's just like, that's a step too far. I don't need that in my life. I said, okay, I'll see you after the Christmas break. It's going to be hard, but we need to do this. Right, I'll see you after the Christmas break. I'm going to end it. He comes into my office after the Christmas break. The first thing I notice is he has a ring on his finger. And I'm like, what's that? He's like, well, you know, I was talking to her about what you said, and we decided that we can make this work. And so we booked a trip to Fiji and got married. So I was like, okay. So when you come to me for pastoral advice and you allow me to speak into your life, and I say to you, you need to end it with your controlling, abusive, occultic girlfriend, what you heard me say was take her to Fiji and marry her. I was speechless. And the main reason, because my counsel now had to change. Because even though he made a poor choice, he was now married. And I have to honor that covenant in the counsel I give him. I was like, you have no idea how hard you made this, not just for me, but for you, man. Because we have to honor that covenant now. You see, marriage are these sacred covenants. Even made in a bad choice, we've entered in to make these vows. And when we do it, we don't just do it before our friends and family. We make these promises before God. And for us to violate those sacred promises with our spouse is not just a violation against our spouse, it's a violation against our relationship and our commitment to God as well. And Malachi is pointing this out to the people in the final section of this passage, where that this is one of the detestable things that they're doing. They're breaking their covenants to go marry foreign pagan women. You see, what we just talked about a minute ago was the singles who were going off and doing that, but it turns out there were some in the nation of Israel who were married, divorcing to go do the same as well. And in the process of doing so, they were tearing families apart, and God was not okay with it. He was not okay with it. And we see this as we finish off this passage, beginning in verse 14 here, where Malachi says, you ask why? Why is God receiving these offerings from us? Well, it's because the Lord is the witness between you and the wife of your youth. You have been unfaithful to her, though she is your partner, the wife of your marriage covenant. Has not the one God made you? You belong to him in body and in spirit. And what does the one God seek? Godly offspring he seeks. So be on your guard and do not be unfaithful to the wife of your youth. The man who hates and divorces his wife says to the Lord, the God of Israel, does violence to the one he should protect, says the Lord Almighty. You see, marriage is given to us by God as this picture of his promise to love us, to provide for us, and to protect us. Marriage is to be this place where we can live those things out in context with a fellow believer. It's to be this safe place where we experience love and security and faith. It's to be the foundation of the family where the next generation develops emotionally and relationally, where the next generation receives training for core values and morality, and where they receive the primary instruction for religious instruction on how they themselves can know and serve and honor God in their lives. But when people casually enter into marriage and don't take it seriously, when people begin to treat it as a contract instead of a covenant, when they treat it like a contract, they start to go, I'm not feeling fulfilled. Maybe I should find a way to cancel it. When people allow themselves to slowly, gradually drift away and entertain other options, you know what happens? A tear begins. A tear starts to happen. And the way that verse 16 talks about this is that a man who divorces his wife does violence against her. Now, regardless if it's the man or the woman who initiates it, the impact is the same. It impacts the whole family. And I think doing violence against another is actually not too strong of a word for it, because I'm sure there is no lack of people who are in this room and online right now who can attest to the fact that they have been hurt by the unfaithfulness, by the abuse, by the abandonment of a spouse. I'm sure there's no lack of people here who bear the scars of when they were children and their parents got divorced. And these sorts of experiences, one of the major things that is leading to a decline of the marriage rate in North America. Because when we divorce, we tear apart two stories. And you can't do that without causing damage. Now, God made a provision for divorce, that's true. In Scripture, he made a provision for it in limited situations. Marital unfaithfulness, abuse, abandonment, and these are things that we would label. It's kind of an unfortunate term, but the technical term for it from a scriptural basis is lawful divorce. But do not mistake God's permitting of lawful divorce to be the same as God condoning divorce. Because God is very clear that he hates divorce, but he permits it. He permits it, why? Well, Jesus said this. Jesus said he permits it because our hearts are hard, meaning that sometimes people will sin against other people. And so the reason that God allows it is actually a way of limiting the damage that can be done to a person, is by limiting the damage that happens. And I just want to say this. If you are in a dangerous situation, or if you are in a situation of unfaithfulness that is damaging your heart and your soul, you need to take care of yourself. You need to reach out for godly counsel to understand how to navigate that in a godly, God-honoring way. But know this. It is God's will for all of us. It is God's will for all of us to live in faithfulness to him, to our spouses, and to one another. And if we will live in faithfulness, we do not need to worry or be involved in these conversations or have fear over broken covenants because we're living in faithfulness. You know, one great way to visualize and to realize this in your own marriage is through this picture of a triangle, where you see at the bottom you have the husband and the wife who are in the bottom corners, and then Jesus at the top. And did you notice that as each person, as the husband, as the wife, as each of them gets closer to God, they also get closer to each other? As we get closer to God, we get closer to each other. You can't do this unless you have the same belief system, unless you have the same shared values. If you have a partner who has a different set of values, you cannot get closer to God in this fashion. But as we get closer to God, we get closer to one another. And this is one of the main reasons that quite honestly, that Dean and I are still together. It's not the only reason. We worked hard and we're committed to each other, but understanding the importance of God in our lives and our marriage is one of the main reasons that we've been able to go through almost 30 years of marriage. It's not because we're perfect, and it's certainly not because it's been easy. You see, no one told us when we got married that we should never expect our spouse to be able to be our only source of love. I'm going to lean on you. You're the only one I'm ever going to love. You're going to fill me up all the time, right? No one told us that our partner will not be able to compensate for the deficiencies that exist within us. They can complement us, but they cannot compensate for our deficiencies. No one told us that our partner couldn't do this for us, but it's the reality. Your partner can't do that for you because you married a human. And your human has their own deficiencies and their own needs for love. And there'll be times when you just don't have the capacity to be all things that your partner needs in every season. No one told us that when we made these vows to be together, to love, encourage, comfort, support for a lifetime, no one told us about the health challenges that we would have to go through that would test those things. No one told us about the financial struggles we would go through. No one told Nadine she'd be a pastor's wife. No one told us about the choices our kids would make and how sometimes that would absolutely just wrench our hearts. And some of these seasons were so hard that left to us on our own devices, they would threaten to drive us apart because it's easier to just not talk about those things. It's easier to just navigate them. It's easier to maybe just pack it in than deal with it. But in the midst of those difficult, hard times, we didn't press apart. We pressed into God. We pressed into God, and there were some days when we would come home, and all that we had the energy to do was to go up to our bedroom and to fall onto the bed, hold each other, cry, and pray. But as we grew closer to God, we grew closer to one another in the midst of those challenges. So I want you to know this. If you know that your marriage is in need of help, the first thing that you need to do is to humble yourself and acknowledge that. And press into Jesus. Press into Jesus in your own life, in your lives with your spouse. And allow his transforming work to do what only his work can do. Allow it to bring renewed life to you as you're faithful to your covenant with him and he helps you be faithful to your covenant with your partner. But then you need to acknowledge your need for godly, qualified support and guidance as well. We can get ourselves into messes, but quite often we need godly support to help us get out of messes. That doesn't mean you call up your buddy or your girlfriend and that's your qualified support. That most often that turns into is just gossip and reinforcing the negative things that got you to where you are anyways. Reach out to a pastor. Reach out to somebody who has training in these things and knows their limits. I have experience in training in pastoral marital counseling. I also know my limits. And when we hit our limits, we refer on to counselors and support in those things as well. I know this is hard, real stuff, but this is the stuff that we run into Monday through Saturday in the church office in people's lives, and we have to be able to talk about it Sunday morning because it's the real life stuff that we encounter. And know this, God is calling his people to be faithful to their covenants with him by remaining faithful to their covenants with one another. And that means in the church, and especially in our families and our marriages. And I promise you this, if you will, not only will you represent him well, but you will be blessed as well. And I got to wrap up, and so I want to do it really quickly just with this final verse that says this: be on guard and be faithful. How do you do that? Well, if you do not currently have a relationship with Jesus Christ in your life, it starts by allowing him into your life, into your home, and into your marriage. That's the only way that he can do the healing, renewing work that needs to happen. And it's not easy, but I can tell you that it's worth it. And so come talk to me after the service, or if you're online, you can reach out to somebody and pray with them online there, and they'll put you in contact with us. Or contact us during the week. We would love to talk to you more about that. If you are a follower of Christ, whether you're in the middle of a good or of a hard season, always believe this. always believe that there is yet one more step closer to Jesus that you can achieve. And press deeper into that step. And I promise you this, that you will find that he is faithful and he will honor that step as you walk closer to him, always seeking a deeper walk with him. You will find that he is faithful in the high seasons and in the low seasons. He will meet you in the midst of that. And he will equip you and he will encourage you to be more faithful to him and by extension to his church, to your families, to your marriages,